On January 11, 2023, deputies from the Waller County Sheriff's Office responded to a call from a man claiming his son had done something terrible. When they arrived at a small cabin in Magnolia, Texas, what they discovered was horrifying. Inside the home, they found 21-year-old Anggy Diaz. She had been decapitated, her body left in the same home she shared with her husband of just 3 months. Outside the house stood 22-year-old Jared James Dykes, Anggy's husband. He didn't flee. He didn't deny it. In fact, authorities say he partially admitted to the killing, but his story wasn't straightforward. He rambled. He blamed drugs. He said voices had told him to do it. He claimed he blacked out. Nothing he said made sense. But one thing was clear. Anggy was gone, and the man who had once promised to love and protect her had brutally taken her life. The news spread fast. A young bride murdered in her own home, a husband behind bars. But before the headlines and the press conferences, before the courtroom and the sentence, there was a life, Anggy's life. Because the real story here isn't just about what happened to her. It's about who she was before that day. If you're captivated by true crime stories and want to stay updated on the darkest cases, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We release in-depth crime documentaries just like this one, uncovering the chilling details behind real-life mysteries. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button now. Anggy Diaz was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, and a fighter. She left behind a grieving family in Nicaragua and a devastated community in Texas. She had dreams, goals, and the kind of spirit that lit up every room she walked into. So before we dive into what went wrong, we're going to talk about everything that made Anggy's life worth remembering. Who she was, what she was working toward, and how she ended up in a marriage that would cost her everything. This is the story of Anggy Diaz. Anggy Diaz was born and raised in Nicaragua, a country rich in culture, but often burdened by poverty and limited opportunity. From a young age, Anggy stood out. Family and friends described her as vibrant, curious, and deeply compassionate. She was always smiling, always laughing, and always looking for ways to help others. She had an easy way with people, whether it was neighbors in her village, classmates, or her foster family. Anggy left a mark wherever she went. But life in Nicaragua wasn't easy. Money was tight, opportunities were scarce, and Anggy knew early on that if she wanted more, if she wanted to change not just her life, but the lives of the people she cared about, she would have to be brave enough to leave home. Her biological mother had already moved to the United States years earlier, working hard to build a better life for herself and her children. When the time came, she brought Anggy and her siblings to join her. The transition wasn't easy. Moving to a new country as a teenager meant leaving behind everything she knew, her school, her childhood friends, and her foster family who had raised her with love and care. But Anggy didn't complain. She didn't look back. She embraced the challenge. Once in the U.S., she began building a life for herself. She learned English, she took on jobs, she made new friends. It didn't take long for people to see just how driven and dependable she was. Eventually, Anggy made the decision to move to Texas on her own, in search of better opportunities. She settled in Waller County, a rural part of the state where she hoped to save money, work hard, and keep sending financial support back to Nicaragua. That support wasn't just for anyone. Her foster mother, the woman who had helped raise her, was battling cancer back home, and even from thousands of miles away, Anggy took it upon herself to help cover medical costs. She worked 2 jobs to make it happen. One was at a taqueria in a local meat market. The other was at a convenience store. She was always on her feet, sometimes working late into the night. But she never seemed bitter about it. She never slowed down. To her co-workers, she was a joy to be around. She was reliable, kind, always smiling, always positive. In the quiet early hours of a morning shift or the long evenings behind a cash register, Anggy brought light into people's days. And she never lost sight of her goals. Anggy wanted to return to school. She dreamed of becoming an accountant. She talked about it often. and those closest to her believed she would have done it. She had the drive, she had the brains, she had the heart. What stood out most about Anggy was her resilience. She had already lived through so much: poverty, separation, migration, and yet she remained grounded and hopeful. She was incredibly loyal to her family even when separated by borders. She carried the weight of their struggles without ever complaining. Her story was one that echoed the experience of many young immigrants, working twice as hard for half as much, staying optimistic despite the odds, and giving more than she ever received. And yet, with all that strength, all that kindness, and all that potential, her life would be stolen in the most brutal way imaginable. A young woman who came to America for opportunity ended up dying at the hands of the person who was supposed to love her most. But before we talk about that, we remember her for who she was: a fighter, a provider, a daughter, a dreamer, and the kind of person this world doesn't see nearly enough. This was Anggy Diaz before everything went wrong. Anggy Diaz met Jared James Dickus sometime in 2022 after settling in Waller County, Texas. By then, she was already working 2 jobs, including one at a taqueria inside a local meat market. Jared, who was 22 years old, was living nearby. His family owned property in the area, and the cabin where he and Anggy would eventually live was just steps from his parents' main house. The details of how they met remain unclear, but those who knew Anggy say the relationship moved fast. Within a short time of meeting, Jared and Anggy were in a romantic relationship. Then, without much warning, they were married. They tied the knot in October 2022 in what many described as a quick courthouse wedding. There was no elaborate ceremony, no formal announcement, and, most notably, Anggy's own mother didn't even know it had happened. According to reports, she only learned her daughter was married after the fact. Her uncle had to stand in for her after much persuasion. The suddenness of the wedding came as a shock to many, especially considering the cultural values Anggy was raised with, which placed great importance on family involvement and respect for tradition. Why was the marriage rushed? That part remains a matter of speculation, but people close to Anggy suspect there was pressure involved, whether from Jared, from the living situation, or from a desire to stabilize her immigration status. Some believe Anggy may have been vulnerable, possibly seeking a sense of safety and companionship in a new environment far from home. Jared, on the other hand, came from a completely different background. He was an American citizen, raised in Texas, an electrician, and according to public records, had minimal work history and no known long-term employment at the time of their marriage. In terms of personality, the differences between them were apparent. Anggy was known for her cheerfulness, work ethic, and quiet determination. Jared, by contrast, had already shown signs of instability. Just a month after their wedding, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated. According to law enforcement reports, he acted aggressively toward the officers during that arrest, an early indication that all was not well behind closed doors. Despite these red flags, the couple began living together almost immediately after their marriage. They moved into the cabin located behind Jared's parents' home. It was a small space, modest and secluded, and just steps away from his family. While some may have seen this as convenient or supportive, others would later describe it as isolating, especially for Anggy, who had no family of her own nearby. There are no reports of Jared holding a stable job during this time. Anggy, however, continued to work both of hers. Friends and co-workers later shared that she still seemed friendly and upbeat at work, but she had become noticeably more withdrawn. Some suspected she was tired. Others noticed subtle changes in her demeanor, things they couldn't quite place at the time. What's certain is that Anggy was giving everything she had to keep moving forward. She was young, she was hopeful, and she was committed to making the best of the life she was building. But the cracks in the relationship were already there, just beneath the surface, waiting to show themselves. And before long, they would. By the end of 2022, just a few weeks into their marriage, things between Anggy Diaz and Jared Dickus were already beginning to unravel. Interviews with Anggy's family and friends afterward will reveal that Jared was always frustrated whenever they were all together. As conversations were mostly in Spanish and he couldn't participate, Anggy would try her best to interpret as much as she could. Friends and coworkers who saw Anggy regularly began noticing a change. While she was still friendly and polite, there was a noticeable heaviness in her demeanor. She no longer lit up in the same way when she walked into work. Her conversations grew shorter, her usual energy seemed dulled. Those closest to her didn't have a name for it at the time, but in hindsight, they described it as someone carrying a silent weight. Anggy never openly complained. She didn't go into detail about what was going on at home, but what she didn't say began to speak louder than words. There were also signs that Jared had developed a pattern of troubling behavior. Public records show that in November 2022, about a month after the wedding, he was arrested for driving while intoxicated. And while a single arrest might not be enough to draw full conclusions, it added to a growing pattern. People who observed the couple noticed that Jared had started showing up to Anggy's workplace. One witness later told reporters that Jared would stop by the store where she worked, sometimes appearing intoxicated. On at least one occasion, it was reported that he was disruptive, causing enough concern that Anggy's coworkers took notice. While there were no formal domestic violence reports filed by Anggy, the behavioral pattern that emerged was troubling. Jared drank heavily, he acted out, he showed up uninvited, and Anggy, by all accounts, became quieter and more withdrawn as the weeks went on. What we see in retrospect are the early signs of dysfunction, possibly control. Jared appeared possessive. He inserted himself into Anggy's work environment, and while she never shared the full extent of what was happening at home, the people around her saw enough to know something was off. By early January 2023, tensions appeared to be escalating. Jared's behavior was becoming more erratic. At home, the couple was reportedly having frequent arguments. According to statements made later by his own family, the relationship had become increasingly unstable. Yet no one seemed to fully grasp how dangerous things had become. Jared was admitted in the hospital about 3 days before after calling the police that he was sick because of substance abuse and had only come the day of the murder. But law enforcement later described the killing as spontaneous and unprovoked, carried out with a large kitchen knife during what was believed to be a verbal dispute. Jared would later claim that he was under the influence of drugs, that he heard voices, that he blacked out. None of it made sense, but all of it pointed back to the same truth. Something inside that home had been unraveling for weeks, maybe months, and Anggy, despite all her strength, was facing it alone. But in all of this, who really was Jared Diaz? Jared Diaz hailed from Waller County, Texas, where he attended Waller High School. During his high school years, Jared was an active member of the school's football team, playing as a middle linebacker and fullback. His dedication to the sport was evident, and he was recognized as a promising athlete. In 2019, Jared committed to playing football at Texas Lutheran University, marking a significant achievement in his athletic career. Despite the potential showcased during his high school years, Jared's post-secondary journey did not mirror the success he experienced on the football field. Details about his time at Texas Lutheran University are sparse, suggesting that he may not have continued his football career at the collegiate level. Following high school, Jared's life appeared to lack the structure and discipline that sports had previously provided. He did not maintain steady employment, and there were indications of personal struggles, including issues with alcohol. Jared's relationship with Anggy Diaz progressed rapidly, culminating in their marriage in October 2022. The swift nature of their courtship and union raised concerns among those close to Anggy, particularly given Jared's recent behavioral issues. It's plausible that Anggy was initially drawn to Jared's past as a high school football standout, viewing him as someone with ambition and potential. However, the reality of his current circumstances painted a different picture, one marked by instability and unfulfilled promise. On January 11, 2023, a gruesome discovery shattered the quiet of Waller County, Texas. The chain of events began when Jared Dicus's parents noticed their son behaving unusually. Their concern deepened upon realizing Jared was in possession of his wife Anggy Diaz's phone, a troubling sign given that Anggy was typically inseparable from it. Prompted by these red flags, they decided to check on the couple's nearby cabin located just behind the main family home. What they encountered inside was beyond comprehension. Upon entering the cabin, they found Anggy's lifeless body. The scene was horrific. The residence was covered in blood, painting a chilling picture of the violence that had occurred. In shock, Jared's parents immediately called 911. When deputies from the Waller County Sheriff's Office arrived, they were prepared for a different perpetrator, Jared's brother, who had a known history with methamphetamine abuse. However, nothing could have prepared them for the reality they faced upon arrival. Inside the modest cabin, they found Anggy's mutilated body, confirming the worst fears. Anggy had been decapitated, with her head discovered in the shower. A kitchen knife, presumed to be the murder weapon, lay nearby. Jared was present at the scene and did not attempt to flee. He was taken into custody without incident. During subsequent questioning, Jared reportedly confessed to the murder, providing a partially coherent account of his actions. He mentioned blacking out and referenced hearing voices, though specifics remain unclear. Investigators believe the murder occurred during a domestic dispute, though the exact timeline and motive are still unclear. The brutality of the crime sent shockwaves through the community. Anggy Diaz, a 21-year-old known for her vibrant spirit and dedication, had her life cut tragically short. The senselessness of the act left many grappling for answers, highlighting the often hidden dangers of domestic violence. In the aftermath, authorities conducted a thorough investigation, collecting evidence and interviewing those close to the couple. Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry addressed the media, describing the crime scene as gruesome and emphasizing the profound impact on both families involved. He noted that the residence was covered in blood and that the weapon, believed to be a kitchen knife, had been recovered. Sheriff Guidry also mentioned that there had been prior disturbance calls to the suspect's parents' home, though it was unclear if they were related to Dicus or another family member. The community reacted with shock and grief, struggling to comprehend how such a tragedy could occur. Vigils were held in Anggy's honor, with friends and family remembering her as a vivacious and beloved young woman. Her mother, Anggy Diaz, expressed profound sorrow, describing the loss as a parent's worst nightmare. The tragedy sparked conversations about domestic violence awareness and the importance of recognizing warning signs. Anggy's co-workers and friends, reflecting on the events leading up to her death, emphasized the need for vigilance and support for individuals in potentially abusive situations. The community rallied together, not only to mourn Anggy's loss, but also to advocate for preventative measures to protect others from similar fates. In the aftermath of Anggy Diaz's tragic death, her mother, Anggy Diaz, and her employer, Veronica Jimenez, shared insights that shed light on the events leading up to the incident. Anggy Diaz, Anggy's mother, expressed profound grief over the loss of her daughter. She revealed that Anggy had been married to Jared Dicus for just over 2 months and lamented that her daughter hadn't confided in her about any marital issues. Daniela herself had fled a violent relationship in Nicaragua, leaving Anggy in the care of an aunt before they reunited in Texas 4 years prior. She emphasized the importance of open communication, wishing Anggy had spoken up about any problems she was facing. Veronica Jimenez, the owner of the taqueria where Anggy worked, noted changes in Anggy's demeanor after her marriage. While Anggy appeared happy with Jared, there were days when she seemed different, tired and possibly troubled. Jimenez observed that Anggy's behavior fluctuated, suggesting underlying issues that she didn't openly discuss. Legal proceedings culminated in the sentencing of her husband, Jared James Dicus. During the pre-trial phase, concerns regarding Dicus's mental health and competency to stand trial were raised. A court-ordered psychiatric evaluation was conducted, and Dicus was deemed competent to participate in the legal proceedings. On July 31, 2024, 23 years old Jared James Dicus appeared before District Court Judge Gary Cheney in Waller County. Dicus entered a guilty plea for the murder of his wife, Anggy Diaz, which had occurred in January 2023. By pleading guilty, Dicus accepted responsibility for the crime, foregoing a trial and the possibility of a more severe sentence. As part of the plea agreement, Dicus waived several rights, including the right to appeal the verdict, the right to appeal the sentence, any potential defenses to the prosecution, including an insanity defense, the right to file post-conviction writs of habeas corpus. The district attorney's office consulted with Anggy Diaz's family before finalizing the plea agreement and sentencing. Judge Cheney sentenced Dicus to 40 years in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. Due to the aggravated nature of the offense, Dicus will not be eligible for parole until 2043 at the earliest. It's important to note that parole eligibility does not guarantee parole. The decision will be made by the Board of Pardons and Paroles based on various factors, including behavior while incarcerated and perceived risk to society. In a statement, Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean Whitmore emphasized the county's stance on domestic violence. Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence. Heinous crimes like this one will not go unanswered. We will seek justice for the victims of domestic violence and send a message to the perpetrators that here we fight for our victims. This sentencing brings a measure of closure to a case that deeply affected the Waller County community, highlighting the devastating consequences of domestic violence and the importance of seeking help in abusive situations. In the wake of Anggy Diaz's tragic passing, both the Texas community and her family in Nicaragua united to honor her memory. Vigils were held where friends and family gathered to celebrate her life through music, prayer, and heartfelt tributes. Her family expressed profound gratitude for the community's support during such a challenging time. To assist with funeral expenses and the repatriation of Anggy's remains to Nicaragua, a GoFundMe campaign was organized by her uncle, Irvin Oriana. The fundraiser highlighted Anggy as the light to our family and community, emphasizing her cheerful personality and the void her absence leaves. The campaign successfully raised $37,915, reflecting the community's generosity and solidarity. Anggy's untimely death underscores the critical importance of domestic violence awareness. Intimate partner violence often goes unnoticed, making it imperative to recognize and address its signs proactively. While Anggy's life was tragically cut short, her legacy endures through the love she shared and the memories cherished by those who knew her. And if you're fascinated by true crime, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss an upload. We have more gripping stories coming soon, shedding light on cases that deserve to be told. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.